Kim Tae-jun sits in his office. The room is large, but there's almost nothing in it. Just a large desk, a computer, and 2 chairs. The city lights up at night outside the window. He doesn't look at the city. He stares at his phone. His assistant, Park, was supposed to bring the money. $1 million. The deadline passed 3 hours ago. Park is not here. This is a bad sign. In Taejun's world, being late is a sign of weakness, and weakness is punished. Taejun picks up the phone. He dials Park's number. He doesn't check the number. He's sure he remembers it. The phone rings once. Someone picks up. Taejun begins to speak. His voice is even and quiet. He's not shouting. He's simply stating a fact. If I don't have $1 million on the table tomorrow, you know what I'll do to you. He hangs up. The conversation lasted 6 seconds. He didn't wait for an answer. He gave a warning. Now he waits. But he didn't call Pak. He'd misdialed 1 digit of the number. He'd called a woman he didn't know. Amira Jackson sits at a table in her apartment. In front of her is a laptop and a cup of cold coffee. She's a journalist. She's writing an article about construction companies. The article is almost finished, but it's missing some facts. The phone rings. An unfamiliar number. She thinks maybe it's an informant. She answers. Hello? But there's silence on the line. Then a male voice. He speaks Korean. His sentences are short and clear. She understands the words million, tomorrow, and I'll do it. His voice sounds calm, but there's a threat hidden in that calm. The call ends. Amira sits motionless. She feels a chill inside. This isn't a normal threat. This is something else. It sounds like a death sentence. She puts the phone on the table. Her hands are shaking. She takes a deep breath. Then she remembers. Her phone automatically records calls from unknown numbers. She turns on the recording, listens again. The same words, the same voice, cold and confident. She understands that this is important. It could be proof. Proof of what? She doesn't yet know. But she senses danger. She decides to take action. She copies the recording onto her computer. She saves it in 3 different places. Then she calls her editor. I need a meeting. Urgently. The editor agrees. They agree to meet in an hour. Amira gets ready. She puts her phone and laptop in her bag. She leaves the apartment. It's dark outside. She looks around. There's no one, but she has the feeling she's being watched. Taejun is still in his office. He's waiting for a call from Park. The phone is silent. An hour passes. Park doesn't call. Taejun calls again. Same number. This time he listens. He hears a woman's voice. She speaks Korean with an accent. Who are you calling? You have the wrong number. Taejun hangs up. He doesn't answer. He realizes his mistake. He called the wrong person. The stranger overheard his threats. This is a problem. He presses a button on the desk. A man in a black suit enters the office. It's his new assistant. There were 2 calls to this number, says Taejun. Find the owner, quickly. The assistant nods and leaves. Taejun looks out at the city. The mistake must be corrected, at any cost. Amira meets the editor in a small cafe. She shows him the recording. The editor listens attentively. His face is serious. It's dangerous, he says. Do you know whose voice that is? No, Amira replies. But it sounds important. Is it important or dangerous? The editor asks. Both. She tells him about her investigation, about construction companies, about connections to criminal gangs. Perhaps this call is related to her work. The editor thinks for a minute, then nods. Use it, but be careful. Don't publish it right away. Gather more information. Amira returns home. She doesn't sleep all night. She works. She searches for connections. She checks the phone number, but the number is blank, no information. In the morning, she makes a decision. She can't wait. She has to act. She posts the recording online. She doesn't use real names. She writes a short text. Caught red-handed, threats from a big shot. She clicks the publish button. Now everything is in other people's hands. 4 hours pass. Amira checks her computer. The post is gaining views, slowly at first. Then faster and faster. People are sharing it. They are commenting. They are asking who this person is. Someone recognizes the voice. Someone writes, "It sounds like Kim Tae-jung." Others support it. New comments appear. Someone jokes. Someone is afraid. Amira looks at the screen. She doesn't smile. She understands what she's done. She's let the genie out of the bottle. By this time, Tae-jun already knows. He's getting calls, first from one of his people, then from another. Everyone's saying the same thing. There's a recording online, his recording. He turns on the computer. He finds the recording. He listens to his voice. He looks at the comments. People laugh. People are afraid. People recognize him. His phone rings. It's his enemy, a man from a rival gang. "I heard you're in trouble," says the enemy. "Need some help?" Tae-jun hangs up. He doesn't answer. His face is stony. He looks out at the city. His city. His territory. But now every person on the street has heard his threats. Everyone knows his voice. He's losing face. In his world, that's worse than dying. He's a laughingstock now. He has to regain his respect. He has to find that woman. He has to silence her. He calls his assistant. "Did you find her?" "Yes." "Amira Jackson, journalist. Lives alone. Good. Bring her to me." The assistant leaves. Tae-jun is left alone. He looks at the recording on the computer. He listens to his voice again. He thinks about this woman. She dared to challenge him. Now she will know what that means. Amira sits at her desk, scrolling through the comments on her post. The number of views continues to grow. She feels a mixture of dread and satisfaction. But the feeling doesn't last long. Suddenly, there's a loud knock on the door. 3 distinct knocks, firm and uncompromising. Amira's heart skips a beat. She's not expecting guests. She slowly approaches the door and looks through the peephole. 2 men in dark suits stand on the landing. Their faces are expressionless. They don't look like police officers. One of them knocks again. The same rhythm. Amira steps back from the door. She realizes who sent these people. She thinks about the recording on her phone. She thinks about the copies in the cloud storage. This gives her a little reassurance. She opens the door. The men don't introduce themselves. One of them speaks briefly and clearly. "Our boss wants to talk to you, right now." Amira nods. She picks up her bag with her phone and laptop. She knows it's futile to resist. She leaves the apartment. Men approach from both sides. They go down the stairs and out onto the street. There's a black car with tinted windows parked there. She is escorted to the back seat. The car starts moving. No one says a word. They drive through the city. Amira looks out the window. She tries to memorize the route, but she realizes it's pointless. 20 minutes later, the car stops in front of a nondescript building in an industrial area. She is escorted inside. They take the elevator to the top floor. The door opens directly into a large office. The office is almost bare of furniture. Just a table and a few chairs. A man is sitting at the table. It is Kim Tae-jun. He doesn't move. He just looks at her. His gaze is heavy and cold. Amira feels a shiver run down her spine. She stands in front of the table. The men remain by the door. A minute of complete silence passes. Then Tae-jun speaks. His voice is the same as in the recording, even and emotionless. "Remove the recording." Amira takes a deep breath. She's been preparing for this. She knows better than to show fear. "No!" Tae-jun slowly raised his eyebrows. He clearly didn't expect a refusal. "Why?" he asks. "Because it's my insurance policy," Amira says. Her voice trembles, but she continues. "If something happens to me, the recording will be published. It won't be me anymore." Tae-jun looks at her carefully. He studies her face. He sees fear, but also stubbornness. "What do you want?" he asks finally. "Interview," Amira says quickly. "Give me the interview. Tell me your side of the story. Explain that it was a mistake. Then I'll delete the recording." Tae-jun looks at her with disbelief. Then he makes a short, dry sound, like a laugh. "Do you think I'm going to justify myself? To you? To everyone?" "No," says Amira. "But you can explain. You can control history. Right now, I control history." Taejun leans back in his chair. He looks at the ceiling. He thinks. Another minute passes. Amira stands and waits. Her legs are shaking slightly. Okay, he says finally. An interview, but on my terms. Here and now. Amira shakes her head. No. I have to record it on camera. In a neutral place. And I ask questions. All the questions. Taejun looks at her with interest. This woman has the courage to bargain with him. This is new for him. It's dangerous. But there's also a challenge in it. Agreed, he says. Tomorrow, I'll send people for you. You'll make a recording, then you'll delete all copies. Amira nods. She understands it's a trap. But she has no other choice. They walk her back to the car. They take her home. When she returns to her apartment, she realizes she's shaking all over, but she also feels a strange excitement. She has a chance. The next morning, a car comes for Amira again. She's taken to a small conference room in a business center. The room is spacious but windowless. 2 chairs are positioned in the center. A camera is mounted on a tripod to the side. Taejun is already there. He's sitting in one of the chairs. He's wearing a dark suit. His face is expressionless. Amira sets up the camera. She checks the sound. Her hands are shaking a little, but she forces herself to concentrate. She starts recording. She starts with simple questions. Who is he? What does he do? Why did he make that call? Taejun answers monosyllabically. His voice is still even, but there's no life in it. He speaks like a robot. He tries to explain that the call was a mistake, that he got the numbers mixed up, that he didn't mean any threats, but his words ring false. He doesn't look at the camera. He looks off to the side. His posture is tense. He sits motionless, like a statue. Amira asks more difficult questions about his business, about his connections, about his reputation. Taejun starts to get angry. His voice loses its neutrality. It takes on a metallic edge. He speaks more sharply. He interrupts her. You're asking the wrong questions, he says coldly. What are the right questions? Asks Amira. He doesn't answer. He just looks at her. His gaze grows heavier. Amira feels the air in the room thicken. She tries to get the conversation back on track, but it's too late. Taejun loses his composure. He starts speaking in a threatening tone, the tone from that very same call. You're playing with fire, he says quietly. You don't understand who you're dealing with. Amira turns off the camera. She realizes the interview has failed. It only made things worse. I can't use it, she says. Taejun stands up, his face distorted with anger. You'll delete the recording anyway, now. No, says Amira. She stands up too. You didn't fulfill your part of the agreement. He takes a step toward her. They stand very close. Amira can smell him, expensive cologne and cold metal. Then we'll do it differently, he says. He turns and leaves the room. The door closes with a soft click. Amira is left alone. She knows she's just made a huge mistake. She gathers her equipment and leaves the building. No one is waiting for her on the street. She returns home by taxi. At home, she watches the recording of the interview. It's even worse than she thought. Taejun looks not like the innocent victim of a mistake, but like a dangerous criminal. His threats sound even more convincing in the interview format. She doesn't publish the recording. She just saves it. She realizes she needs to be even more careful now. But she doesn't know that she's already being watched. Not by Taejun's people, by others. 2 days pass. Amira tries to live a normal life. She works from home. She only goes out for groceries. She constantly looks over her shoulder. She feels like she's in a cage. On Wednesday morning, she needs to go to the editorial office. She decides to walk. It's not far, just a few blocks. She leaves the house. It's sunny outside. People are rushing to work. The usual city bustle. Amira walks along the sidewalk, lost in her thoughts. She doesn't notice the white van slowly driving behind her. As she turns into an alley, the van accelerates sharply. It stops right in front of her. The rear doors swing open. 2 men in black masks jump out. It all happens very quickly. One of them grabs her by the arms. The other throws a bag over her head. She tries to scream, but the bag muffles the sound. They push her into the van. The doors slam. The van starts moving abruptly. Amira lies on the floor. She can't breathe. The bag smells of dust and chemicals. All she hears is the hum of the engine and the heavy breathing of the men. They don't drive for long, maybe 20 minutes. Then the van stops. They pull her out. They lead her down some corridor. Then they go down some stairs. The air becomes cold and damp. The bag is removed from her. She finds herself in a small, windowless room. The walls are concrete. There's a mattress in the corner. The door is metal. The door closes. The lock clicks. Amira sits down on the mattress. She's shaking. She doesn't understand who these people are and what they want. She thinks about Tae-jun. Are these his people? Has he decided to get rid of her? But a few hours later, the door opens. A man enters. He's not wearing a mask. He has a smooth face and an expensive suit. He looks like a businessman. "Sorry for these conditions," he says politely. "This is temporary." "Who are you?" Amira asks, her voice hoarse. "We're friends," the man says. "We want to help you." "Help? In this way?" The man smiles. His smile is unkind. "We know about your problems with Kim Tae-jung. We can protect you." Amira understands. These aren't Tae-jun's people. These are his enemies. They think she knows something, that she has information, or that she matters to Tae-jun. "I don't know anything," Ishi says. "We don't think so," the man says. "You met him. You have a recording. You were in his lair. You should know something. He just wanted me to delete the post." "And you deleted it?" "No." The man nods. He looks pleased. "Good, then we'll need you." He leaves the room. The door closes again. Amira is left alone in the darkness. She realizes she's become a bargaining chip in a conflict she never even suspected. Tae-jun is sitting in his office, reviewing reports. Things are going badly. His reputation has taken a hit after the disastrous interview. His partners are avoiding meetings. His competitors are becoming more active. Suddenly, the phone rings. It's his informant in the Biko gang. They took the girl, that same journalist. They're holding her in an old warehouse at the port. Tae-jun slowly hangs up. His face is expressionless, but inside, everything is boiling. This is the worst possible scenario. If something happens to Amira, everyone will think it's his doing. The authorities will take notice. His rivals will use it against him. Her death will make her a martyr and him a monster. He presses a button on his desk. 3 of his most trusted men enter the office. They stand and await instructions. "We're preparing an operation, a warehouse at the port. We need to free a hostage, a journalist, alive and well." The people nod. They ask clarifying questions about the location, security, and approaches. Tae-jun answers clearly. He's already studied the map of the area. They leave in 40 minutes. 2 cars. Tae-jun is in the first. He doesn't trust this operation to anyone else. They drive up to the port. They park their cars half a kilometer from the warehouse. They continue on foot. The night is dark. Fog from the sea limits visibility. The warehouse is an old brick building. The windows are boarded up. 2 security guards stand at the main entrance. They are smoking and talking. Tae-jun's men act silently. 2 of them sneak up behind them and neutralize the guards. They don't kill them, just put them to sleep. Tae-jun approaches the door. It's locked. One of his men picks the lock in 30 seconds. It's dark inside. It smells of damp and oil. Voices can be heard, somewhere in the depths of the building. They move down the corridor. Tae-jun goes first. He holds a pistol with a silencer in his hand. A guard appears from around the corner. Tae-jun fires without warning. The bullet hits him in the leg. The guard falls. He is immediately subdued. They find a room with a metal door. Another guard stands by the door. He raises his weapon, but doesn't have time to fire. Tae-jun's bullet hits him in the shoulder. Tae-jun approaches the door. It's locked. He shoots at the lock. Twice. The lock shatters into pieces. He opens the door. It's dark inside. Amira is sitting on the floor. She's pressed against the wall. Her eyes are wide open with fear. She looks at Tae-jun. She can't believe it. He lowers the gun. He takes a step forward. "Get up. We're leaving." Amira doesn't move. She's in shock. One of Tae-jun's men takes her hand, helps her stand. She staggers. Her legs don't obey her. Quickly, says Taejun. They leave the room, walk down the hallway. Screams are heard outside. They have been discovered. A firefight begins. Taejun's men cover the retreat. They shoot accurately. They don't kill, only wound. Taejun leads Amira out the back exit. A car is waiting for them outside. He puts her in the back seat and sits down next to her. The car starts to move abruptly. They drive away. Shots can still be heard behind them. Amira sits hunched over. She's shaking. She looks out the window. The city rushes past. Taejun is silent. He looks forward. His face is calm. The car arrives at a safe house, a small apartment in a residential area. No one knows about this place. Taejun leads Amira inside. She sits down on the couch, still shaking. He brings her a glass of water. She drinks it in small sips. 15 minutes pass. She gradually calms down. Why? She says finally. Her voice is quiet. Why did you save me? Taejun is standing by the window, looking out at the street. I need you alive. Why? If you died, everyone would think I destroyed you. Your recording would be a sensation. I would be destroyed. Amira nods slowly. She understands the logic. So it's not because of... She doesn't finish. Because of what? He turns around. It's nothing, she says. She puts the glass on the table, looks at him. What now? You can't keep me here forever. No, he agrees. But I can't let you go either. You know too much. All I know is that you're a criminal, she says. I knew it from the very beginning. And now you know that I have enemies, and that these enemies are ready to kidnap journalists. They are silent. The room is quiet. What are you proposing? Amira finally says. A deal, says Taejun. You help me. I help you. How can I help you? Your post is ruining my reputation. You must help me restore it. Amira looks at him with disbelief. How? You're a journalist. You know how the media works. How to manipulate public opinion. Do you want me to clear you? No. I want you to show the truth. What truth? She smirks. That you're a good person? That I am not the monster that they make me out to be. Amira shakes her head. I can't do that. It would be a lie. It will be a different truth, he says. Everyone has their own truth. She is silent, thinking, what will I get in return? Life, he says simply. And the opportunity to work, without the fear of being kidnapped. She understands that this is not an empty threat. Without his protection, she won't survive a week. Okay, she says. But on my terms. Which ones? No lies. I'll show you what I can, but I won't lie. Taejun looks at her, then nods. Agreed. He extends his hand. She looks at his hand, then slowly shakes it. His hand is hard, cold. The next morning, Amira wakes up early. She spent the night in a safe house. She slept poorly. She had nightmares. Taejun is already on his feet. He's sitting at the table drinking coffee. There's a laptop in front of him. Amira sits down opposite. She still feels uneasy, but the fear has passed. The fatigue remains. So, she says, where do we begin? From the plan, he says. You said you knew how to do it. She nods. We need to show you from a different side, not as a criminal, as a person, someone who helps people. Taejun frowns. Charity? That won't work. Why? She says. People love stories of redemption. The criminal who became a philanthropist. It sounds fake. It's worked for many, she insists. But it has to be the right gesture, something genuine. For example, an orphanage or a hospital, something that people support. Taejun thinks. He looks out the window. I have a fund for the families of deceased sailors, but I've never advertised it. Why? It's a private matter. Now it needs to go public, says Amira. We're organizing an event. You're making a large donation. We're inviting the press. But not everyone. Just those who write good material. Taejun shakes his head. It won't work. People will see through the fakery. They won't notice if it's sincere, she says. Are you really helping these families? Yes. Why? He looks at her, then looks away. My father was a sailor. He died at sea. Amira nods. She feels like this could work. Okay, here's what we do. She begins to outline the plan in detail: press release, photos, interviews, social media. Everything must be meticulously planned. Taejun listens. He asks questions. He's skeptical, but gradually begins to understand the logic. Who will write the material? He asks. I did, says Amira, but under a different name, so it wouldn't look like an excuse. What if you are exposed? Then it will be a scandal, but the risk is worth it. She continues to explain, you need to choose the right journalists, the right publications. Everything needs to look natural. Taejun listens. He looks at her with new respect. She knows her stuff. Okay, he says finally. Let's try. It's not a guarantee of success, she warns. People might not believe it. I understand, he says, but I have no other choice. He gets up and goes to the window. We'll start tomorrow, he says. I'll give you everything you need. Amira nods. She feels a strange excitement. For the first time in a long time, she has a purpose. She looks at Taejun. He's standing by the window. His back is straight. He looks invulnerable, but she's beginning to realize that's not true. He has weaknesses too, and now she knows what they are. Amira was completely immersed in her work. She had transformed the safe house into a command center. The walls were covered with charts and plans. 3 laptops sat on the desk, each for a different task. She began by analyzing public opinion. She studied all the articles and comments about Taejun and identified the main negative points. People saw him as a heartless criminal, ready to destroy anyone in his path. The plan was simple, but it required precise execution. It was necessary to show the other side, not to justify the crimes, but to demonstrate the complexity of nature. She chose an orphanage in an industrial area. The place was run down, the funding meager. The director was desperately looking for sponsors. Amira arranged the meeting. Taejun arrived without security, dressed in simple clothes. He silently surveyed the building. The children were afraid of him at first, but eventually they got used to him. The money transfer was done without fanfare. Taejun personally handed the check to the director. Amira filmed it, but without unnecessary fanfare. The footage was restrained and sincere. Then she arranged another interview, this time in an informal setting, at the same shelter. Taejun sat at a simple table, children running around. He spoke quietly, without his usual coldness. He answered questions about his motives. He didn't make excuses, but simply explained. He talked about business, about responsibility, even a little about his childhood. Amira watched his reaction closely. She saw him tense up when the questions became too personal, but he held his ground, following her instructions. When the interview ended, he looked tired, as if after a hard fight. Are you happy? He asked when the cameras turned off. This is just the beginning, Amira replied. Now we need to present it correctly. She selected the best shots, the ones where he was natural, where his eyes showed concentration rather than coldness, where his hands weren't clenched into fists, but rested calmly on the table. The material came out gradually. First, a short note about the donation, then an interview in a specialized publication, then social media posts on behalf of the charities. The reaction was mixed. Some cried hypocrisy, but many began to doubt. They saw a change. They said that a person can't be unequivocally bad. Taejun watched the reviews silently. He didn't comment, but Amira could see it was bothering him. For the first time in years, people were talking about him with more than just fear. One evening he asked, "Do you really believe that this can change anything?" "I believe in the power of stories," Amira replied. "The truth is always more complex than it seems." He didn't argue. He simply nodded and left the room. Amira was left alone in front of the monitors. She watched her perception slowly but surely change. It was delicate work, requiring patience, but she believed in success. Park watched the scene unfold with mixed feelings. He'd been Taejun's right-hand man for years. He'd been with him through misunderstandings and hardships, and now he watched it all fall apart. He didn't understand this new strategy. Repentance, charity, interviews. All of it seemed to him a sign of weakness. In their world, force was the only argument. He was especially irritated by Amira, the journalist who suddenly became an advisor. She understood nothing of their rules. Her methods were alien and dangerous. Pak saw old allies begin to distance themselves. He heard whispers behind his back. His rivals no longer feared Taejun as they once did, and fear was the foundation of their power. He tried to talk to Taejun. He explained that they were losing respect, that they were becoming a laughingstock. But Taejun didn't listen. He trusted this woman too much. It was then that Park made a decision. If Taejun couldn't protect his organization, someone else would. He contacted the Baeko clan, old enemies who had long coveted their territory. A meeting was arranged on neutral ground. Lee, one of the Baeko leaders, sat at the table. "I'm listening," El said without preamble. "Taejun is getting weaker," Park began. "He's playing some kind of games with the journalists. He's forgotten who he is." Lee smiled. He already knew about Taejun's new initiatives. He considered it a wonderful opportunity. "What do you suggest? I can hand over some of the operations to you, clients, suppliers, but I need guarantees." "Which?" "A place in your organization and protection." They came to an agreement quickly. Park relayed information about an upcoming deal, a large arms shipment through the port. Taejun was to be present personally for the unloading. Park knew this was the perfect opportunity to remove Taejun and seize power for himself, and at the same time, get rid of the annoying journalist. He returned to headquarters as if nothing had happened. He informed Taejun about the upcoming delivery and convinced him to personally oversee the operation. "There could be problems without you," Pak said. "People are nervous after all this press business." Taejun agreed. He still trusted Park. They had worked together for too many years. Pak left the office with a feeling of satisfaction. Everything was going according to plan. All that remained was to wait. Taejun told Amira about the upcoming trip. He said it was an important operation that couldn't be disclosed. "I have to come with you," Amira insisted. "This could be good material, to show you some real work." Taejun initially refused. It was too dangerous. But then he thought, maybe she was right. He needed to show more than just charity. They left late in this evening. 2 bodyguards, a driver, Taejun, and Amira. The car drove through the dark streets of the port district. Amira looked out the window. She felt the tension. The bodyguards were on guard, their hands constantly near their weapons. Taejun sat silently, staring ahead. He seemed calm, but Amira noticed how he kept checking his phone. They pulled up to the warehouse they'd been told. It was a large, abandoned building. Not a soul was around. Only the wind blew between the empty containers. "Where are the people?" Taejun asked. "They should be inside," Pak answered over the phone. "I'll be there soon." They entered the building, a large hall almost empty, only a few boxes in the corner. And then Taejun realized, too quiet, too empty, no sign of preparations for delivery. "Let's get out," he said sharply. But it was too late. The doors slammed shut. Armed men appeared from all sides. They were surrounded. Amira instinctively stepped closer to Taejun. The bodyguards took a defensive stance, but there were too many opponents. El came out of the shadows and smiled. "Good evening, Taejun. I was waiting for you." Taejun said nothing. He just took in the situation. There were no exits. The windows were barred. The doors were locked. "Pak says hi," Lee said. "He really wanted to be here, but he's busy." Taejun nodded. Now it all became clear. Betrayal. A classic. He looked at Amira. She was pale but surprisingly calm. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't crying. She was just waiting. "What now?" asked Taejun Lee. "Now we'll talk about your business. And who's going to run it now?" LS men approached. The bodyguards prepared for battle. The forces were unequal, but they had no intention of surrendering. Taejun slowly raised his hands and took a step forward, shielding Amira. "Let her go. She has nothing to do with this." Lee laughed. "Oh no, she's very relevant. After everything she wrote about you." I think we'll find a use for her. Amira clenched her fists. She knew it was the end. The story she wanted to tell would end here, in this dark, abandoned warehouse. But Taejun didn't lower his gaze. He continued to study the room, looking for weaknesses, opportunities. His gaze held no anger, but a cold calculation. The very same one that made him a leader. He hadn't lost yet. He simply found himself in a difficult position. And he always found a way out of difficult positions. The silence in the warehouse was deafening, but it lasted only a moment. Everything happened in a single breath. Taejun, still holding his hands up, abruptly lowered his right hand, snatching a compact pistol from under his jacket that hadn't been noticed during the search. The first shot rang out before the adversaries even realized what was happening. The bullet struck the nearest fighter in the shoulder, and he collapsed with a scream. It was a signal for chaos. His bodyguards, taking advantage of the momentary hesitation, returned fire. The space filled with the roar of gunfire and screams. Gunpowder smoke filled the air with a pungent haze. Taejun moved with frightening efficiency. He made no wasted movements. Every shot, every blow was precise and deadly. He didn't just shoot, he controlled the space, pushing L's men back to one of the walls, creating a zone of relative safety for Amira. But the forces were too few. 3 against 10. One of Taejun's bodyguards was already lying motionless, struck down by a bullet to the head. Amira pressed herself against a pile of old crates. Her heart pounded, her temples throbbed. Fear paralyzed her, but somewhere deep inside, her survival instinct kicked in. She looked around. Her gaze fell on rusty chains piled in the corner, a long piece of metal crowbar, and a crate of empty bottles. She couldn't shoot. She couldn't fight. But she could distract. When one of the attackers attempted to flank Taejun, Amira threw an empty glass bottle with all her might. It shattered on a metal beam a meter away, but the sharp clang momentarily distracted him. That second was enough for Taejun to turn and disable him with a well-aimed shot to the leg. Another fighter, noticing her, moved toward her. Amira, without thinking, grabbed the metal crowbar. It was heavy and awkward. She didn't know how to use it, so she simply held it in both hands like a barrier. Her opponent chuckled, seeing her helplessness, and approached. At that moment, Taejun's second bodyguard crashed into him from the side, knocking him down. The fight erupted into hand-to-hand combat. Taejun, seeing that Amira wasn't a passive victim, but was fighting as best she could, took advantage of this. He began moving, using her actions as cover. She created noise, movement, and distraction, while he ruthlessly whittled down the enemy's numbers. Lee, watching from cover, realized the plan was falling apart. He hadn't expected such fierce resistance. He shouted for his men to retreat to the exit, trying to regroup. And then, just as the gunfire died down for a moment, the warehouse's main door swung open with a bang. Park stood there, unarmed. He looked at Taejun with cold hatred. "It's over, Taejun," he said. "Surrender. I promise it will hurt, but it will be quick." Taejun slowly straightened up. He tossed aside the empty pistol. He was out of ammunition. His bodyguard, the only one left standing, was wounded and holding on by sheer willpower. The situation had become critical again. "You were wrong, Park," Taejun said quietly. His voice was hoarse from the smoke, but completely calm. "You were wrong when you thought I'd become weak, and you were wrong when you brought her here." Taejun took a step forward, then another. He advanced on Park, unarmed and empty-handed. Park, confident in his advantage, grinned and took a step forward, accepting the fight. Park was younger and perhaps physically stronger. He landed the first punch, quick, sharp, aimed at the jaw. Taejun took it on his forearm without even faltering. Taejun's counterpunch was slower, but incredibly powerful. His fist connected with Park's solar plexus, causing him to gasp. This wasn't a fight in the classic sense. It was a massacre. Taejun didn't fight. He destroyed. His every movement was filled with cold fury, not just because of betrayal, but because this traitor had jeopardized everything he'd built, and the man he now realized had become more than just useful to him. Park tried to resist, but he was overwhelmed by his rage. Taejun broke his ribs, his arm, and knocked him down. With a final blow, short and precise to the throat, he immobilized him completely. Pak fell to his knees, choking on a cough. Taejun stood over him, breathing heavily. He looked at Amira. She was still clutching the crowbar, her eyes full of horror. But she looked at him, not away. At that moment, Lee, realizing all was lost, tried to escape through the back exit. Taejun's wounded bodyguard raised his pistol, but his hand was shaking. "Enough sacrifices for today," Taejun said hoarsely, without taking his eyes off Park. He leaned over his former assistant. "You will live, Pak, to remember, to see what happens next." He straightened up and looked at Amira. The fight was over. A month passed. Much had changed in the lives of Taejun and Amira. The conflict with the Bayeko clan was won not by force, but by strategy. The information Park had passed on to their enemies turned out to be part of a trap Taejun had laid in advance. He suspected something was wrong, but refused to believe the betrayal until the very end. Lee's defeat was crushing and final. Now Taejun had no serious rivals. But the main changes occurred not in his sphere of influence, but in him and in how he was perceived. They stood on the stage of the assembly hall of that very same orphanage. The hall was full. Journalists were present, but this time not because of the scandal, but by invitation. Over the course of a month, Amira had executed a brilliant campaign. The story of the Mafia boss's transformation was presented as a story of redemption and social responsibility. She didn't hide his past, but emphasized the present. The large-scale donations, the creation of a fund to help the families of sailors, the real help people were receiving. Taejun no longer concealed his face. He stood before the cameras in a simple dark suit, without his usual entourage of security guards. His appearance had changed. Gone was the previously distant coldness. His gaze became calmer, but no less firm. He spoke quietly, without pomp, answering questions about his motives. "People change," he said in response to one question. "It's not who you were, but who you become, and what you leave behind." Amira stood a little distance away, off stage, watching him. She was dressed in a formal suit, holding a clipboard with materials. She was his advisor, his PR person, his strategist. But she was so much more. When the formal part ended, Taejun stepped off the stage and approached her. The children from the orphanage, already accustomed to him, surrounded him, showing him their drawings. He listened to them, nodding, and for a moment something vaguely resembling warmth appeared in his eyes. "You held up well today," Amira said quietly, when the children were distracted. "It's thanks to you," he replied just as quietly. "You showed me that strength isn't just in fear." They walked out of the noisy hall into a quiet corridor, the echo of children's voices left behind. "What next?" Amira asked, looking out the window at the children playing in the yard. "Next comes work," said Taejun. "Real work, legalizing the business, new projects. The fund requires attention." He paused, looking at her. "I can't do this without you." It wasn't a request, it was a confession. Amira turned to him. She remembered everything they'd been through together. The accidental call, the fear, the kidnapping, the fight in the dark warehouse. She remembered how he'd fought, how he'd protected her, how he'd changed over the past few weeks, and how she'd changed. She was no longer just a journalist looking for a sensation. She'd become part of something bigger, something complex and real. They were no longer enemies. They were no longer boss and subordinate. They had become a team, partners. "I know," she said simply. They stood side by side, looking toward the same future. Their story, which had begun with threat and hostility, had transformed into something else. It was only just beginning. New challenges lay ahead. New battles, not in dark warehouses, but in offices and on the pages of newspapers. But now they faced them together. 3 days after the event at the shelter, Taejun called Amira to his new office. It was located downtown, on the top floor of a glass skyscraper. The interior was minimalist: light wood, steel, panoramic windows. Nothing superfluous, a symbol of a new path. Amira entered, noticing the change in his demeanor. He was sitting at a wide desk, not leaning back as before, but leaning slightly forward, studying financial reports on a tablet. A cup of green tea, not strong coffee, sat nearby. Sit down. He pointed to the chair opposite. We have a problem. What? Amira settled herself more comfortably, habitually taking out her notebook. The police, or rather one specific investigator, Inspector Park. Taejun put down his tablet. He doesn't believe in my rebirth. He's been digging through my old files for years. And now that I've emerged from the shadows, he's become more active. What does he want? He wants proof, any kind. Connections to old operations, financial flows. He thinks the charity is just a cover. Amira thought, tapping her pen on the page. That's to be expected. We couldn't have imagined that everyone would believe it right away. But it's also an opportunity. Taejun looked at her, waiting for her to continue. If we're completely transparent about new projects and disclose some of the Foundation's financial statements, his suspicions will look like bias. We could turn him from a hunter into a pesky fly. Inspector Park isn't a fly, Taejun remarked coldly. He's a pit bull, and once he gets his teeth into you, he won't let go. Then we need to be smarter. We'll give him what he's looking for. Old, classified information, something that won't lead anywhere, but will satisfy him for a while. Meanwhile, we'll completely wipe out all current operations. Taejun nodded slowly. The plan was risky, but it made sense. A preemptive move. Okay, get to it, but be careful. Don't underestimate him. Amira was about to leave when he spoke again. And one more thing. On Saturday, there's a meeting with investors from Europe. They're interested in our port terminal. You'll be there. Your insight into our new image will be helpful. It wasn't a request, but there was something new in his tone, respect for her professional judgment, not just as a public relations specialist, but as a strategist. Of course, she nodded. As Amira left the office, she felt a familiar tension. Taejun's old life, a world of shadows and violence, refused to let them go so easily. It lingered behind them in the form of Inspector Park, in the ghosts of past cases. Their newfound partnership was once again being tested. But this time, they had a common front, and she was ready to fight not only for his new reputation, but also for the fragile trust that was beginning to emerge between them. Their battle had moved from dark warehouses to bright offices, but that didn't make it any less dangerous. Working with investors took up the entire day. The Europeans were meticulous, their questions hitting the nail on the head, touching on the most complex aspects of Taejun's business. Amira countered them with cold clarity, channeling their aggressive attacks into constructive channels. She noticed how Taejun, usually distant in such meetings, listened attentively to her arguments, and approval flickered in his eyes. When the tense negotiations finally concluded with the signing of a preliminary agreement, evening had fallen. The remaining participants had departed, and they were left alone in the large conference room, bathed in the soft light of sunset. The air was filled with a tired satisfaction. You were magnificent today. Taejun broke the silence. He stood by the window, watching the city lights come on. His profile seemed less sharp in the dim light. It's my job. Amira took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose, feeling the accumulated fatigue. No, what you do, it's more than just a job. He turned to her. Do you believe that? That I can really change? The question hung in the air, unexpectedly personal. Amira put her glasses aside. I believe in the facts. The facts show that you're investing in legitimate businesses, helping people, and no longer using old methods. As long as you continue to do that, I'll be here. He nodded slowly, his gaze sliding over her face, lingering on the bruise under her eye, almost gone from that night at the port. He'd struck the blow himself, accidentally, while throwing her attacker away. Your bruise? Has it gone away? His voice grew quieter. Amira involuntarily touched the skin under her eye. Almost. Don't worry. I'm worried, he admitted, and that simple confession rang louder than any scream. Back then, in the warehouse, and now. This game with the police is dangerous. Inspector Park won't stop. I know what I was getting into, Amira said, meeting his gaze. And I'm still here. They looked at each other across the room, and in that silent gaze there was more to say than they could have. The past was utter darkness. The present was shaky ground. But in this fragile moment, something new arose. A mutual respect that would grow into something more. "You haven't had dinner," Taejun suddenly stated, breaking the tense silence. "I know a quiet place. No pretense, just food." It was an invitation, the first time something went beyond a strictly professional relationship. Amira hesitated for only a second. The fatigue suddenly receded, giving way to a strange, aching anticipation. "Okay," she agreed. "Just food." The place turned out to be a small, inconspicuous restaurant in the old quarter, far from the glamorous central streets. The interior smelled of ginger, garlic, and grill smoke. The owner, an elderly Korean man, merely nodded to Taejun in recognition and, without further ado, led them into a private room with a low table and floor cushions. He was different here. He took off his jacket, loosened his tie. His movements became more relaxed. "This place belongs to my old friend's father," he explained, pouring her a cup of fragrant barley tea. "They don't treat me like the boss here." They ordered food. Several simple but filling dishes. The conversation initially centered on business and plans for the foundation, but gradually, under the warm lamplight and the cozy atmosphere of the establishment, the conversation began to change. "Why did you stay?" he asked again, tasting the spicy stew. "After everything that happened, you had a chance to leave, to start over." Amira put down her chopsticks. "Because I saw more than just a bandit in you. I saw a man capable of action, someone tired. And I thought this story, about how people change, was worth telling. Even if I never publish it." "You speak like a journalist," he remarked, but there was no reproach in his tone. "And have you ceased to be who you were?" she retorted. He thought, looking at the pieces of barley floating in the tea. "I try. Sometimes, out of habit, I want to solve a problem the old way, quickly and harshly. But then I remember," he looked at her, "that there are other ways now, more complex, but perhaps more correct." He told her a little about his father, about how he'd dreamed of starting a legitimate business, but circumstances had driven him into a dead end. These were fragmentary recollections, devoid of sentimentality, but Amira listened, realizing it was the first time he'd shared this with anyone. She, in turn, spoke about her childhood in a multicultural neighborhood, how she always felt between two worlds, and how this taught her to see nuances where others only see black and white. By the time they left the restaurant, it was well past midnight. The city had fallen silent. He called a car for her. "Thank you," she said before getting into the salon. "For just the ride." "Thank you," he replied, his hand lingering for a moment on the car handle next to hers. "For the company." The car pulled away. Amira stared out the rear window until his lone figure on the sidewalk was out of sight. Nothing happened between them. Not a single unnecessary gesture, not a single hint. But something shifted. The invisible wall separating business partnership from personal territory showed its first almost imperceptible crack. And they both felt it. The next few days were filled with intense work. Amira prepared the fund's financial statements for regulatory filing, trying to preempt any potential questions from Inspector Park. Taejun, meanwhile, immersed himself in the legal aspects of the deal with European investors. They saw each other mostly at meetings, and their communication remained strictly businesslike. But that evening meal hung between them, an unspoken but palpable shadow. Late one evening, Amira, working in her office, heard muffled but sharp voices coming from Taejun's. The door was ajar. She recognized Taejun's deep, confident bass voice and the shriller, fear-filled voice of the other man. "I warned you, Kang!" Taejun's voice wasn't a shout, but an icy, heart-wrenching silence. "You knew the rules. Clean deliveries. No side schemes." "Boss, please, this is the last time," a man named Khan wailed. "I have a family, children. Debts." "They threatened." Taejun interrupted. The chair creaked, and he stood up. Amira froze, her hand automatically reaching for the phone, the old journalistic habit of turning on recording automatically. "You didn't just steal. You implicated my foundation's name in this. You exploited the trust I'm trying to build." There was a dull thud, as if something heavy had fallen on my knees. Please, I'll give it all back. I'll quit. I'll leave. Amira held her breath. She faced the very choice he'd spoken of. Solve the problem the old way, quickly and harshly, or find a new path. She feared the sound of a blow, a scream. But silence followed, long, oppressive. Tejun finally said, the weariness in his voice breaking through the ice. You quit. Now! You will draw up a detailed written explanation of all your schemes, every sum, every contact. After that, you will disappear. If I hear your name or see your face again, no debt will matter. Do you understand? Yes, boss. Thank you. Thank you. Get out. The door swung open, and a pale, shaking middle-aged man rushed out, not looking around. Amira remained seated, her heart still pounding. She turned off the recording, feeling a strange mixture of relief and shame for her disbelief. A few minutes later, her office door quietly opened. Tejun stood in the doorway. He looked exhausted. You heard. It was not a question. Yes, Amira admitted. And what do you think? His gaze was heavy, searching her eyes for condemnation or disappointment. I think some habits die hard. But you did it differently. You gave him a chance. It was weakness, he said, walking around the office. The old me, in his place. He wouldn't be walking anymore. It's not weakness, Amira said, quietly but firmly. It's strength. Controlling yourself is harder than giving in to anger. He stopped opposite her, across the entire office. He used the fund that... He didn't finish, but Amira understood. The fund was his most vulnerable spot, his greatest redemption. We'll fix this, she assured him. We'll provide a full report before it becomes public knowledge. We'll turn this failure into a demonstration of transparency. He looked at her, and gradually the tension in his shoulders eased. Okay, he said simply. Do it. And in that moment, he wasn't a formidable boss, not a former criminal, but a man bearing a heavy burden and trying not to break. And she realized she wanted to help him carry that burden. The crisis with Kang's manager was contained. Amira worked almost without sleep, drafting press releases and preparing documents. Tejun was nearby, attending to every detail. They became a team in the truest sense of the word, their actions well coordinated and synchronized. That night, when the hardest part of the work was over, he entered her office. It was already past 3 a.m. Home, he said. You're falling off your feet. Just a little bit more. She reached for the cup of cold coffee, but he took it from her hands. Enough. I'll take you. This time she didn't argue. Fatigue was getting the better of her. They walked silently down to the parking lot and got into his car. The city was empty and silent. Thank you, he said, looking at the road. For these days, you didn't have to. I have to, she interrupted, looking out the side window at the passing lights. I put part of myself into this. He turned toward her house, but instead of driving straight away, he stopped the car in a quiet park overlooking the sleeping city. I was thinking about what you said, he began after a pause. About how people change. Sometimes it feels like I've just put on a new suit, but underneath it, it's still the same person. It's not a suit, Amira countered, turning to face him. Her face was lit only by the dim light of the street lamps. A suit can be removed. You're changing from the inside. It shows. It shows in your decisions, even today with that manager. He was a weakness, he repeated again. No, he was a test. And you passed it. He looked at her, and in the darkness of the salon, his eyes seemed even deeper, even more serious. Amira, he called her by her first name, without her last name, for the first time, and something inside her skipped a beat. You expect too much of me. And you? Her voice was a whisper. What do you expect from yourself? He shook his head slowly. I don't know. For a long time, I had only one goal, to survive and become strong. And now there's you, and your gaze. Sometimes it's heavier than the gaze of any enemy. She was at a loss for words. The air in the car became thick and tense. I don't want to disappoint you, he added so quietly that the words were almost drowned out by the silence. You won't disappoint, she replied just as quietly. As long as you keep trying. He reached out and touched her fingers where they rested on the center console. It was a fleeting, almost weightless touch, but it burned her skin. Neither of them pulled their hands away. They simply sat there, looking at each other in the dim light, listening to their hearts beat loudly, anxiously, and in unison. Long before dawn, he finally started the car and drove her home. They didn't speak, but as she stepped out, his gaze said everything. And her answering gaze, full of quiet understanding and budding hope, was his answer. The wall between them didn't collapse, but a door appeared in it. And they both stood on opposite sides of it, not yet daring to take a step. A year has passed. Sunlight flooded the spacious yet cozy ceremony hall. There were no pompous banquets, crowds of guests, or intrusive paparazzi. Just a few dozen people, those who had been through thick and thin alongside them. The director of an orphanage, holding the hand of a little girl. Several former sailors, whose families were now under the protection of the foundation. An elderly restaurant owner acting as a foster father. And Taejun's loyal followers, those who stayed and learned to work in the new legal field. Taejun stood at the altar, wearing a simple but impeccable dark gray suit. He looked neither tense nor triumphant. His face expressed a rare, profound calm. He looked toward the far end of the hall, where Amira had appeared. She walked toward him, not in a fluffy white dress, but in an elegant cream suit, and in her hands she carried not a bouquet, but a single peony. Her smile was quiet, confident, and her gaze was fixed solely on him. There was no trace of the fear or uncertainty he had felt at their first meeting. There was knowledge of all his darkness and all his light, and a willing decision to embrace both. When she reached him, he extended his hand, and her fingers rested lightly on his palm. It wasn't just a gesture, it was the end of a long journey. You came, she said quietly. I'm home, he answered just as quietly. The ceremony was short. They exchanged rings and simple, unpretentious vows, not to be together until death do us part, but to be each other's support and truth every day we are given. Later, at a modest reception, a man approached them whose presence no one expected. Inspector Park. He had aged over the past year. His stubborn gaze had dimmed. Kim Taejun, he nodded, then turned his gaze to Amira. Mrs. Kim, congratulations. Inspector. Taejun nodded in response, his face remaining neutral. I'm closing your case, Pak said curtly. Officially, not because I believe in your holiness, but because you've become boring. Clean taxes, transparent deals. He grimaced in disgust. Nothing to cling to. You're no longer my prey. He turned around and left without saying goodbye. Amira looked at Taejun. Boring, he repeated with a slight, almost invisible smile. That's the best compliment I've ever received. In the evening, they stood on the balcony of their new, not so large, but full of light apartment, with a view not of the skyscrapers of the business district, but of a quiet, green park. His arm rested on her waist, her head on his shoulder. There was silence between them, but it was a peaceful, rich silence, not the heavy, wary one it had been before. You didn't regret it? She asked, looking at the sunset. He turned to face her, his fingers gently tracing her cheek. About what? About me stopping being a ghost and becoming a man? About me having a name and not just a reputation? Or about me having you? He shook his head. About nothing, not for a second. Me too, she whispered. Their kiss wasn't passionate or desperate. It was slow, deep, and infinitely tender. It wasn't the kiss of two people united by passion or circumstance. It was the kiss of two lonely souls who had finally found their home port after a long voyage across stormy seas. Their story began with lies, threats, and fear. It passed through the fire of betrayal, the pain of loss, and the weight of redemption. And it ended here, in the quiet evening light, in a simple touch, in a shared silence filled with meaning. They didn't live happily ever after, because happily ever after is a fairy tale. They lived on, with scars, with memories, with difficult days and joyful evenings. But they lived together, and in choosing to be together, despite the past and despite the future, lay their greatest victory. Not over their enemies, but over themselves. Their story wasn't over. It simply moved on to a new, quiet, and lasting chapter, where the main focus wasn't challenges and battles, but quiet evenings, shared dreams, and the warmth of a hand found in the darkness.